All right, so Dwight Mankin, how are you, sir? Good to see you.
Good seeing you.
I appreciate you joining me, man. And I didn't realize you were a podcaster already. That's fun to hear.
Yes. Thankfully, my son got me engaged in podcasting about 2 years ago. So we've been doing it in our company now on a weekly basis. We try to, but yeah, podcasting's great. It's a great way to communicate.
What was your initial reaction to the idea of starting a podcast? Were you excited about it, reluctant about it? Tell me.
Well, I was excited about it because I love to learn, and podcasting is a great way to kind of point, click, and learn from some of the best people out there, and whether it's an insurance industry or self-help situations, or just listen to authors about their books they're writing, or consulting side of things. I really enjoy that. So it's a great medium. It's not the only medium, but it's a great way to connect with people, but also quickly get access to some great thought leaders out there.
Well, I like it for all the reasons you just listed, but I do believe I like the art form of the long form conversation, which the podcast brings it back. You're not restricted to a format on a TV show with a certain number of commercials every 5 minutes. And so you do allow people to flesh out ideas. It's fun. It's more, to me, it's a little more human, right? Like I get a chance to sit across from you for an hour and we have a conversation, which is a lot of fun. So I'm glad you've embraced it. I'm glad Blake introduced you to it, and who knows where this will go from here from you. But so today, of course, we're bringing the conversation back to the TPA, the third-party administrator, the administration side of a self-funded plan. Everything we do revolves around a core of self-funded on this show. I've touched on the TPA a couple times, but I think what you guys obviously is very unique, and I want to hear more about that. But before we do that, it's always fun to get to know the person. I know you've got a big family and a happy family, and obviously an illustrious career as well. So could you tell us more about Dwight Mankin?
Sure. Real quick, been married, going to be 35 years now in December, married to Sharon. We've just love her dearly. She's been awesome. And we've been blessed with 3 children. All 3 are married. Our oldest is Blake, married to Megan. They have 3 children. Our middle child is Emily. She's married to Will, and they live here in Frisco. They have 2 children. And then our youngest is Austin, who's married to Kirby. They also live here in the Dallas area, and they have 2 children now. So grateful and blessed by them, and they encourage me, and I try to encourage them, but we just enjoy family. So it's been great.
You got some grandbabies as well, right?
Yes. We are number 6, plus we just took on a foster baby of 4 weeks. And so our youngest is doing that. So it's been great. Just love them dearly.
Well, you already were able to recite everybody, ages, locations, and number of kids. I won't make you go further and, how many grandkids, and, ages and stuff like that. But kudos to you, because I know that's hard to keep track of. But I love big families. I didn't come from a huge family myself, and my wife didn't either. But I think it's always fun, especially as you look at families grow and you come back for holidays and things like that, and get everybody in one place. It's just so much fun to watch.
It is.
And it sounds like obviously that's a big part of who you are as well.
We love the fact they're close by and we get to be part of their lives. And now in this, we call it the second half of life, we have an opportunity to continue to invest in the grandkids and be a part of that journey in their lives. So we're excited about that.
Well, it's funny, when my dad became a grandfather, I remember just seeing like the difference in him. It was almost like at this phase in his life, there was like that renewed purpose of the kids, and always wants to come. My mom as well want to come watch him play soccer, or want to come over. Any excuse to come over now is great. And
exactly,
it's fun. It kind of reconnects the family again around the grandkids. So love hearing that. What about your professional career? I saw you started as a rep, a group rep, which I didn't know. So tell me about the origins of that.
Real quick. When I graduated from college, I was going to law school, and quickly realized I didn't have enough money to go to law school first year. So I deferred my trek into law school, and I took a job with Mutual of Omaha. And the reason is it was in Omaha. And secondly, that's where I was accepted to law school, is Creighton. So I was going to say, hey, I can go there and then go work for a year and get enough money saved up, go to law school. Well, as I started, I signed up to be a group rep, had no idea what that meant, none whatsoever, other than I got a company car, and that's all I needed to hear.
A company car at the time? Nice. Okay.
And so signed up for that, went through their 6-month training program, and then realized they said, hey, well, we may need to move you to help you open an office and or be part of this office that had been newly established. And I didn't really understand what that was. And next thing you know, I was transferred down to Dallas.
Okay.
So I worked for Mutual Omaha for about almost 3 years, and then was recruited to work for a company called Intracor, which was at the time a division of Cigna. Intracor was the largest clinical management company in the U.S., and I really didn't know anything about clinical management other than when I was at Mutual, we had outsourced that service, the pre-cert continued stay review services, to a company called Healthcare Compare. And I got very interested in this whole clinical side of things, and got recruited by Intracor, and then helped establish a sales office here in the Dallas market. We had a call center here, and it was kind of a rocket ship that took off.
Really? Okay.
Just from how we scaled the organization. Intracor was a very unique organization, very entrepreneurial. We had 130 offices throughout the United States. We had about 2,300 nurses. Learned a great deal about entrepreneurial ways to start things and make it happen. Cigna, we were part of Cigna. Cigna really left us alone. We were very entrepreneurial in that process. I progressed the organization to where I headed up sales and product, and then did some work on the international scene in clinical management. Really loved it, and loved it so much that I've had an entrepreneurial niche to start something. So after about 12 years, left and started a company, co-founded with a company, or my other founder was John Weimer. He was also part of Intracor. We started a company called Value Check. Okay. As a clinical management company that was focused with third-party administrators. And the reason we did just third-party administrators, we felt there was a unique niche that these companies doing clinical management, I had Walmart and AT&T's and a lot of state groups and Fortune 500 clients in general, but a lot of TPAs were being ignored on developing very customized approach to TPAs because of the stop-loss issues. Yeah. And people weren't really understanding the need on stop-loss of how to get in front of these high-dollar situations back many years ago. And so we said, hey, our tagline was no surprises. No surprises. Because that's all people want to say. I don't like surprises. Why did I find out about this high dollar claim? Didn't know about it. So we created a company called Value Check that was geared to getting in front of those claims and working closely with stop loss companies that really hadn't been done. And that grew that substantially, and then we ended up exiting that to Fiserv. Fiserv at the time was out buying TPAs throughout the United States, consolidating those.
What time period was this?
Oh, gosh.
I know, I did test you there.
Yeah.
90s?
Yeah, for the 90s.
In the 90s, okay.
Yeah. And sold that off, and then became part of Fiserv, finished that acquisition, and then moved over to become CEO of a company called TrustleTree, which was early stage health coaching. Some of my friends were VCs that had put money in it. They were based in Springdale, Arkansas. Their client was J.B. Hunt. And I was fascinated by how can you get truck drivers healthy? And there was this whole early adoption of how do we get health coaching? What does that look like? How do you get people engaged in that? And their first client was J.B. Hunt. So I came over as their CEO, helped them scale the organization, be part of how do you take this early adoption of health coaching in a generic sense. We had clinical nurses, we had nutritionists, we had pharmacists that were out there doing one-on-one phone calls to help people be engaged in delivery of care. Got that to a point of scale, and then exited that, and then came back to Dallas and became president of a company called NCN, National Care Network. The reason I started with them is they had this unique technology and patented methodology of looking at value and claims that are out of network, and saw a real need for some scientific way to approach how do you value a claim when there's no contract and defend it in such a way. And so they had come up with some unique way, methodology to use publicly available cost estimates from CMS to be able to patent that information and do it in real time, which was called data eyesight. And we grew that substantially, working with Cignas and Aetnas of the world, utilizing that technology, the data eyesight. We then sold the company to Multiplan. Stayed on in Multiplan for a couple of years until we finished that, kind of getting that integrated in their program, and then left and became part of what we call clinical for high dollar situations called Communitas, which was really focused on large case where we could deploy a nurse anywhere in the country within 48 hours. And the reason we started that company was because stop loss, when the Affordable Care Act, the lifetime maximums came off the table. You basically had a blank check that you had to deal with. A provider would go, hey, you've met your deductible and coinsurance. There's no end to this bill going on. And the problem was, if you're trying to do that telephonically, it's hard to know exactly what's going on in that community, what the providers, the family members, what's really going on. So we marketed that program, and we became part of the Amwins organization, and then integrated that within WebTPA
so did you have any affiliation with Web prior to the integration within the Amwins family, or?
Yeah, I've worked with Web for many years through the services and programs I was part of selling to WebTPA. So I knew the founder, Mike McKay. We were dear friends, known him over 30 years now. And so I'd always sold services to their TPA and worked with them through that process. And they had a great TPA. When we were coming up with this idea of doing the on-site program, it was kind of the stars aligned where there was an opportunity to embed that too within the Amwins family of companies, specifically within WebTPA and their service offering, as well as other TPAs out there and stop-loss carriers that were looking for some ways to better control those high-dollar situations. So that's how we got kind of reconnected back into the WebTPA side, but I had worked with Mike and the team for many years. So it was just a natural progression to land there, and I've just thoroughly enjoyed being president of the company there. And
how long have you been with Web then?
6 years now.
6 years now. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, and just blessed by a great team. Mike has really done a great job in founding Web, and the team there. They're very entrepreneurial, committed, passionate about what they do. I enjoy getting up in the morning and be part of that team, and love what we do. It's not easy work, as you know, Spencer, in this world of benefit administration, today's environment. But they do have a passion. We have a passion to make sure it happens. So,
well, especially with the complexity of the groups that you obviously deal with. So, and we'll get into the. I can't wait to talk about We Do Weird here in a minute. I love that. I love that motto. One of my favorite mottos. Before we get too far into Web, though, I did want to ask you. I noticed on your kind of your CV on LinkedIn, you spent you went back to college, right?
Yeah.
And studied theology. So can you tell me the motive? I mean, of course, I can guess the motivator, but what made you kind of mid-career decide that you wanted to study this? I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah. Well, when I didn't end up going to law school, I ended up getting my MBA and finished that. And then being here in Dallas, I got connected to Dallas Theological Seminary because some of the speakers or teachers there I had heard speak at different churches and conferences. And I just go, wow. There's some just incredible people that I would love to learn from. As I mentioned earlier, I'd love to learn and be engaged in that, but especially around faith and what is that? How do you balance faith and work together? And I've always felt that the church has a purpose and a great purpose on mission, but sometimes we feel that the only thing that can happen is in a church. I think a lot of things happen outside of that and in the day-to-day living. And I felt there was a need to be better equipped in that just for my own personal journey in faith. And so I entered into DTS and went through the program and got my master's there in Christian education. Okay. And, but every day you interact with people, especially in healthcare, who are in crisis, whether it's as working within the employer itself, say Web, but also people you're interacting with day in and day out that maybe have never stepped foot in the church, but who are hurting or who are trying to figure out what's going on. And I wouldn't say I have the answers, but I feel like it's allowed me to have a better perspective of life when somebody's diagnosed with a critical illness or somebody's going through a challenging situation in life. I've tried to say, how do I equip myself better to understand the why behind what's going on? Not only for my own personal journey, but being able to say, here's what I've learned. My wife was a breast cancer survivor, went through that journey, and just kind of asking the whys of why you go through that. What's the meaning behind it? What is God trying to teach us in those situations? And so that's kind of the why behind it. And I've always enjoyed it and valued that time at seminary, but also the journey, ongoing discipline and interacting with people throughout their lives of the messiness that happens in life and trying to figure that out together. So I'm a firm believer in iron sharpen iron type situations and working with people and encouraging, but also being encouraged in the journey of life.
That's amazing. And it's interesting that you chose to. Was it somewhat of, I want to make sure I do this, so I'm going to actually enroll in a program for accountability or structure, or what? Obviously you could do some of the learning on your own, but so was it what was the official, kind of motivator there?
Yeah, I think the motivator was I would have always regretted if I moved and didn't go to DTS.
Okay.
One of a great seminary in the United States. And I would have regretted not saying I had some of the best professors in the world sitting in the backyard, and I didn't get a chance to even learn from them.
Yeah.
And so that was a big motivator for me. The other thing is just help me answer some of the questions that I've always had. And not that it's always clear, but help me give me some, from my perspective, some foundation from which to try to filter through life and help people through that, and not only help them, but help myself through that too. So,
well, it's funny. I've sat down across a couple people that have said that entrepreneurs like yourself as well, that they set out to solve their own problems first.
Right.
So that I was just trying to fix something that I was dealing with, and then found out, oh, this is a business, or there's broader application, which I think is funny seeing, I've sat across from probably 7 or 8 folks that were definitely entrepreneurs in the space, and you start to see some themes develop. And one of those, I think, is a thirst for knowledge, just a continuous thirst for knowledge, like recognizing, oh, I didn't go to college and now I'm done learning. That's the starting point for a lot of these folks. And so I can relate to that. I appreciate that. And I'm glad. I just find it really interesting that kind of at the midpoint of your career, that was something that you did on the side, but now have infused that back into your work life. So kudos to you for that, man. So let's talk WebTPA. We beat around the bush for 15 minutes or so, but WebTPA, big fan. Full disclosure, obviously was at AMWINS prior to where I am now. So we had connectivity there, and I love what you guys are doing. So talk to me about that. And if we can start, I think if we start with We Do Weird and what that means, that'll give us a good jumping off point. So please tell me in a kind of short story about WebTPA.
Yeah, WebTPA is a company that's almost 30 years in the making. It started out mentioned Mike McCabe is one of the founders, started out really working in East Texas with hospitals. The idea was hospitals were really trying to figure out how to not only be part of the community, but provide benefits to the community, but through setting up insurance plans or being more community-based insurance plans. And not only do that, but also solve their own internal problems with their own employees for that hospital. And Mike had created the consulting firm at the time, which was called Sprinix, to go in and consult to these hospitals. As they were consulting, they want to say, how do we go out to those local employers and say, we are the hospital of choice. We are the right solution. We can have you come in and all those things. As they were going through that consulting, it became clear that there needed to be an administration side of things. And thus, in that due diligence of trying to figure out how do you create an administrative platform for that community-based approach, but also for their own employees, it was clear that no third-party software was able to handle the unique situation of a hospital trying to work in a community-based approach, and thus became the kind of the seed creating our own software and creating the WebTPA environment. So we went from Sprinix as a consulting firm, moving to Check, which was more of just doing some basic administration, to when we got the venture funding, creating our own platform, our own software, became WebTPA. And that's where we are today. Very
cool. So WebTPA, obviously third-party administrator, you guys have a big focus on the larger group space.
Right.
I think you've even continued to go up market, if I'm not correct. But what is the weird component to you? When you guys say we do weird, tell me, what does that really mean? What type of business are you doing? How are you separating yourselves from your standard TPA in the market?
Yeah, great question. I think, the reason we say we do weird is because what we have found as we've been moving through this self-funding journey in the market is where our sweet spot is those clients that say they know exactly what they want, but they're not looking for, quote, just give me a network solution. I'm looking for some way that I can customize my programs, that I want to have direct contracts in this location. I want to have a bundled arrangement over here. I want to use some transparency tools to better align myself. I want to have centers of excellence programs. And so as we're sitting there, we're going, boy, there's some weird things here. Weird in just the standpoint it's not cookie cutter.
Yes.
And so that's why we said, listen, if you want cookie cutter, which is more in the smaller group size, the larger group are saying, I have enough power in their minds to be able to make change, whether they have a large population in a certain location or a brand name itself to be able to go to market. They have power and wanting to be able to say, listen, for that, we want to have ability to make unique changes to our plan to work with providers and work more collaboratively. To do that, you have to do some weird things from the traditional standard things. And so as we progressed as a TPA, we realized that our sweet spot was really in the large group market. That's the 5,000 employees or more that are looking for those highly customized approaches, ability to do one-offs in situations, either in a geographic location or how we tier the networks, and ability to kind of wrap also those areas where vendors have come to that employer, and an employer says, I want you to work with these 5 vendors. Most TPAs say, well, I can't work with them. We don't do that. We say, okay, we'll figure it out. We'll wire it together and make it all work and make it as seamless as possible. So that's the weirdness of it in that situation. So that has really been kind of our stake in the ground, where we've lived and breathed an ability to look at a client today and say, hey, based on where you are today, what are you trying to get to? If they have a clear journey they want to get to, and maybe it's a piece of it is network, but pieces of it are other things that are very unique, we go, you're the right client for us.
Okay.
If it's a client that says, hey, what's your network and what's your discounts? That's not a client for us. We can do that, but that's not what really makes us tick and where we really are successful.
Well, and it's what I used this term before, but the niches get riches.
Right.
Yes. So you guys have said, hey, we're not for everybody, which is actually a good thing, right? You're almost choosing your space rather than it being chosen for you, which I can appreciate. So, as you go up market, I presume there's fewer and fewer competitors that kind of directly do what you do. So is it a situation where people are almost specifically seeking WebTPA out at that point rather than quoting or RFPing? They're saying, hey, how can you guys help us build what we want to build, right?
Yeah, definitely, Spencer. I think it's more people coming to us, and it's not that we rely on that. It's just because the market is such, when you get to that size groups, you start really having to focus, and there's a handful of people that play in that space too, from consulting or, hey, I know who you talk to. I know that you've got something very unique you're trying to do. This is a TPA you should talk to because they can do what you're trying to do. And so that's where we play really well. And we just made a decision that as we've been progressing over time and where the self-funded market is, that space really fits us well. And then if we go into that kind of the standardized process, it's attractive to other TPAs, not so much for us. So we've kind of left that market and play better in that customized space.
Well, is there something specific? Because obviously you have a size segment you operate in, and like you said, that cutoff kind of is going up market. What is it about specifically a large group that you're unable to replicate a similar scenario for a 100 life group or a 500 life group? Tell me what the challenges are for the group size.
In some ways, the 100 life group is just as labor intensive than a large group in a lot of areas, just from the standpoint of setup type things. But what's unique about the larger group is the fact that they are looking for ways to always push the envelope and saying, today you might be doing this, but what are we going to do next month? How are we going to change that? We have a provider group over here. Can we do a direct? Can you do a bundled on this? Can we redirect through a transparency tool to be able to say, can you rank those and be able to have that in real time? Can you try to channel from a phone call to this provider? Those type of things. On the 100, it's the blocking and tackling perspective. On this side, it's just very complex on your data, what you're using, those type of things. What is data telling you? Who's going to manage the data? Are they using consulting firms, reporting analytics? Are we going to do that? There's just a lot of moving parts in that larger group. Now, it's important to note, just to step back a little bit, is under WebTPA today is we operate in 3 primary functions or segments. Segment 1 is our outsourcing. We have a significant amount of business in our outsourcing where we're backrooming for companies such as Hartford, Transamerica, where we are doing the administration, customer service, but it's white labeled. And we're doing a lot of their voluntary products. And that is a substantially growing segment for us. We've been doing that for a number of years. And that is just good basic business for us. And it continues to grow for us. The second segment is in what we call our health plan space, our hospital space. We have close to 40 hospitals that we administer for. And hospitals are very unique in and of itself. It's all about domestic steerage, and if it goes outside the hospital system, how do you manage that in unique ways? And that's been a very nice segment for us. And then the third segment is our employer segment, self-funded segment. And again, that segment is what we're talking about, is those that we do weird in that segment. Hospital segment, and we do weird in that because hospitals are very customized. You know, one hospital says, listen, we got all these programs, channel them into our hospital. Another hospital says, well, if it's this type of diagnosis or this type of procedure, you got to tier the network in such that we can allow that to occur over here, not occur over here. If it goes outside this, please call us for approval, all those kind of things that we have to build into it. So that process is such that we have a versatility in our offerings to those market segments. But as you're describing, the self-funded space in the large market is where I have activity is focused on in that segment right now.
Well, is it people, of course, are coming to you for subject matter expertise, right? But I mean, it sounds like you guys almost position yourselves as consultants in addition to being a third-party administrator, because a lot of what the problems you described you're solving are maybe unique to a specific circumstance, and you guys bring the knowledge base to say, okay, if that's what you want to do, we have experience in setting this arrangement up. So, you know, tell me about, like, let's say somebody says, I want to have a direct contract with this provider group. What are some of the mechanics to go and execute something like that?
Yeah, great question. The first thing that we would do there is first determine if we have any history, particularly with that provider group. Secondly is, what does the network contract allow them to do? If they're using what type of network? Is it an Aetna, Cigna, or a regional network, or is it a hospital-based network? What is going to be allowed in that situation? Can you pull that out of that contract, if you will, and do something one-off for that particular provider group? Will they allow that to happen? If so, then how are you going to reprice that claim? Who's going to reprice the claim? So you have to kind of go through those steps of saying, hey, we get this a lot. Somebody comes and says, you know what, we've got a lot of people going to XYZ provider group or hospital. We want to do a direct contract with them. We go, okay, great. Here are some things to consider in that process and how best to do that. We don't necessarily go out and own contracts. We don't want to be in that business of owning contracts. We want to be able to administer and facilitate and let that employer have that direct relationship with the provider, or they hire a consultant to go in and set up these contracts. We will then administer that. But the process there is clearly understand, what are you trying to get out of that? What will be allowed in that? And if this is the way that it's allowed, is there a way we can figure out an innovative way to go around that rule to still work for both parties? And that's kind of what we bring to the table.
Well, knowing what questions to ask, right? Yeah, which is fascinating. You know, doing this, right, you start to go, well, hey, I have a structure to this conversation, but, oh, I should ask. You know, it's interesting, though, that in your situation, what you really bring to the table is, hey, well, if this is what you want to do, here are the things that you need to tell me in addition to that. Because I know where your end point is. Now here are the steps and the questions we need to ask along the way to execute that.
Yeah. I think a better way that what I like to do in those situations is say, if we, as you've described what you're trying to get to, if fast forward 12 months from now, and if we're sitting here, how would you know it was successful? What are those markers? What is the metric? Yeah. What are you using? How would we define that was a great whatever it was? Is it based on savings? Is it based on customer service? Is it based on taking the workload off somebody? I think in this business today, especially in the space we play in, when we say we do weird, part of doing weird is making sure you know where the target is. Because weird can mean, unless you know it, you can do a lot of back and forth and get very frustrated because you go, somebody has an idea, they know it's non-standard. So where you can err is just make an assumption, well, that's what they want based on this. And you find out, no, that's not what they wanted. So in doing weird, you have to be really careful to make sure you define what that customer wants weird to be and how you're going to define success and get in front of that. So asking the right questions, providing feedback up front of what will work or not work, and then say, let's use these as a guide. If you're saying 12 months from now, this is what success looks like, then let's you know, as Stephen Covey always says, begin with the end in mind and work our way back.
I love that. Yeah. It's funny, you hear in the brokerage industry, the advisor industry, a lot of people position themselves as disruptors, which great, you're a disruptor, but if you don't know what you're actually disrupting in the end goal, you just become disruptive. And you have to ask the question, well, does my client want to be disrupted, or what does the disruption actually look like? Because, it's great to position yourself as a disruptor, but that actually might end up being a detriment to the employer you're working with, because like you said, you didn't have that end in mind that you started with. So weird, again, is great, but there's got to be a coordination of the weird to whatever the end point that they're trying to accomplish. So I obviously, with 30-year track record, you guys are clearly on the right track there. What about the data analytics side? I know you obviously said you started as a software company, so I'm sure you're capturing enormously useful data. So what kind of stuff are you doing around the actual claims and that side?
Spencer, I think that's the great, it's the holy grail of where we sit today in self-funding. And one of the challenges in data today is understanding, one, where is the data coming from? Two is who's ultimately responsible for reporting that data? And then three is who's accountable from the output of that. What are you going to do with it? It's the what, so what, now what type deal. And where it's a little bit different in today's environment is we have some clients will say, hey, we have a third party that's going to manage all the data. So just dump the data over to them and let them run with it, okay? And then we'll have other clients say, we want you to own the data and provide the output and analysis. And then we'll have some where there's bits and pieces of it. I think the biggest issue today is trying to understand who is going to be responsible for the data and the output of that and the management of the data. Meaning, because things are so complex, example, if you're now saying, I've got 5 different vendors involved, and they're looking at data from their own perspective, how do we make sure that when we get to the end of that 12 months, if you will, that all these different parties we've wired together, that there's a story that shows how all this interacted and how did the ultimate total cost of care come out. Okay. And I think we're all still working through some of that, because if you're a vendor who says, I've got a very niche product in the mix, you're going to try to say, it's a great product, but I need to prove that the product is saving, whatever that is. So you have that slice of data that they're going to try to prove. From our perspective, we have to say we're looking at the total data, wherever it's coming from, and how to build it together and then provide that. And I think there's dances, because now you have different companies that are niching even within the data perspective, the fraud and abuse data. Let's look at this and see this. Let's look at transparency data. Where is some of that we can build out there? So for us is we have the data, we know how to mine the data, we know how to do the output of the data. It's a matter of sitting down and saying, client, what are you trying to get to with your data? Who's going to own the data, the output and the ownership of the what's, kind of the what now, what, so what type deal situations. So that's what we always have to work through in today's environment, because some consulting firms will say, we'll run the data, or the broker, that's part of our fee. We'll look at your data. And then sometimes what will happen is then they'll come back to say, well, we want you to do it. And we go, well, we thought you were going to own it. But that's where we have to be clear on who's owning the data, because we capture everything.
Well, and somebody that's maybe less sophisticated or experienced in reviewing it will look at it, that data set, and go, what am I supposed to do with that? That's probably the so what part of it. They come back to you and say, hey, you tell us what this actually means, because we don't know what we're looking at. Do you guys get into the predictive world as well? I mean, you taking that historical data and then trying to trend it forward or look forward to prevent claims or identify them early?
Yeah, I think our next wave that we're working on is the actuarial component of, now what do we do? I think this industry has been very good of the what and the so what. So here's what's happened. Okay, great. Now what are we going to do about it? And so we are building more templates and more process around the consulting side. And I use that term loosely because we're not trying to infringe on their consulting relation, but ultimately they come to us and say, well, what should we do now? And we kind of go, well, then we need to build that next step out in our report package to be able to say, here's what the data, the input of the data, here's what it's showing. Based on this now, this is what you need to do. And historically, our industry has always relied on the consultants to say, this is what you now need to do. And what we say is, you're literally looking at us now saying, because you're doing weird, because you've seen this all, what should we be doing as next steps based on what you're seeing? So that is where we think the next couple of years really plays into more of that. What should we do, and giving more feedback on that.
Well, and I understand why a consultant might be concerned if you're infringing upon the space, but a consultant also, their job is the entire strategy, execution for what that employer is trying to accomplish. Right. A good consultant or a great consultant is going to know, okay, well, who do I need to go to now that I know what it needs to be done? And that's where you pull in WebTPA and you lean on a WebTPA because of that, rather than being threatened by the notion of TPA bringing their insight to the table. Right. And I'm sure that's probably not happening often, but I do understand why you want to draw the line in the sand and say, we're not getting into your space. We're not trying to infringe. I would ask you, if you don't mind, recently the news, obviously, that there was an acquisition or a divestiture, so no longer part of the Amwins family. So give me some of the story there that you can share.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, Amwins was a great company. Yeah. They own a number of companies, as you know, Spencer. I think they're up to 52 or so.
Yeah, it's hard to keep track of some of these days. Yeah.
And they're a great company. WebTPA is part of that organization. We had a great run with them.
How long was the run? A decade or so?
I think 2006 was when we became part of it. So good run with them. And I think as our market was, Amwins is a wholesaler. And when you look at third-party administration, it's a little unique in their portfolio of companies. And as we were continuing to grow, we got to a point where our markets were basically much different than kind of what Amwins traditionally was serving. And at the same time, they were fully supportive of what we were doing in our growth and what we were trying to do. We just had an opportunity working with GuideWell on a very large client down in Florida called Nextera. And we were able to secure that business. But during that due diligence process and working with Nextera, we became more engaged with a company that GuideWell owned, which was Florida Blue Cross.
Okay.
So in that, we secured that business and then became working as a network solution with the Florida Blue Cross plan. And through that, we had known some of the people there at Florida Blue, GuideWell, for a number of years, but this opened up an opportunity to begin a dialogue about what they were doing in the ASO market, what GuideWell in general was trying to focus on long term. Okay. And so it was just kind of aligning of the stars where we've kind of grown significantly, and now we're really focused on what we're trying to do. In their space, they were looking at what they wanted to do long term and saw our platform, our ability, our customer base outside of Florida, and they go, hey, we need a platform like you all have and what you're doing in the self-funded space. And so it just made sense for us to become part of that family, the GuideWell family. So today we closed on that deal in November, and we're part of the GuideWell family. There are about 8 different companies within GuideWell. We're still remain independent within GuideWell. It's a mutual nonprofit. It's not publicly traded. The goal was to still remain an independent TPA. So they've done that. We're just trying to help them in what their space is, of letting them focus on some markets that they're better equipped for, and allowing some of those things to move over to what we specialize in, our self-funded administration and ability to sell nationwide continually with where we are today. So it just kind of worked out, and it's made sense for all parties. Amwins, very important to us. Yeah. We do a lot of work with Amwins, continue to do that. And GuideWell, very supportive of what we're trying to do. So it's just kind of all worked out.
And it's obviously the Amwins was there in the earlier stages, and you guys grew. So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing when there's a divestiture or an acquisition, whatever you want to position it. But I'm curious, as we move into the future, then what does that mean for Web now with this transition? What do you feel like you might be able to be better positioned to do at this point?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that it allows us to do. One is still maintain our independence. We did not want to be part of a publicly traded company. Still maintain our independence. Get additional investment dollars to scale the organization, investments in with everything going on in technology. We had ability to have that as part of the process of the acquisition. It positions us well for the future. It gives us another source of sale. Okay. When we talk about the markets, when we look at the weirdness that is needed in self-funding market, the larger employers, in Florida, that was necessary. Some major corporations there, the ability that could be a sales channel for us as well, that business coming over to us. So it just gives us a broader reach in the markets that we want to serve, while at the same time making sure we continue to do well in our outsourcing business, which continues to grow very well, and in our health plan space. This gives us another sales channel from which we can, rather than having to hire a bunch of salespeople, that team is saying if it's ASO, it's under the WebTPA environment.
Perfect.
And which is great. And it still allows our independents to continue to work with the Cignas of the world, the Aetnas of the world, where you still utilize accessing their networks. We still have that right to do that. And so it's worked out well.
Well, sounds great. It sounds like, perfect marriage. It's always interesting how these things happen where started out from a client perspective of a case you guys won, and then it ends up transitioning into something. And we've had conversations, we'll go prospect. Obviously our technology goes through the broker channel, and then you have some brokers that go, well, hold on a second. I'd like to talk to you more about the business.
Right.
Okay. And it turns into a different conversation, but it's also fun, right? You feel like you've built something that people have interest in, which is always a nice thing. Is there I had Chris Wilson on here the other day. He's over at Healthcare Highways.
Yes.
Am I mistaken, or is there a relationship? Tell me about what that relationship looks like.
It's very
not just Chris, but obviously Healthcare Highways as well.
We've been long-term partners with Healthcare Highways, great organization. And kind of to our point, when we talked about our markets in the self-funded space, we know that we don't play in the smaller market. When we say smaller, I always say it's under 3,000 employees, right?
Which is really big to a lot of people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know. I always say when I say that, it's like, oh gosh. But we said we had to pick our space. But we also know that as Healthcare Highways was developing a market, they were working on some smaller, and I say smaller, under that limit. And we've just kind of made a decision that we were not going to be in that space. But our relationship with them has been long-term. We have a great relationship with them. And we said, hey, we could work at a situation like an outsourcing like we do today, where you can use the system. Your people are doing all the front-end things, the setting up accounts, selling, all that components, customer service, and we do the claim administration on the back end. Okay. We have a couple of those relationships already. We've been doing that for a number of years, but it allows us to allow them to have the system access, of which we've built and is very robust, but allow us not having to handle the, quote, setups of it and all the other things that they're better equipped to do in that size market than we are. So that's what we've been doing. We started that relationship for them on the system access, I think almost a little over a year now, almost 2 years now. Okay. And they've done a great job, and it works for us and it works for them.
Well, I love that. That's one of the things that I'm most grateful for is the fact that this marketplace we live in, the economy in North Texas, especially the Frisco area, especially, there's just so many great companies here. And especially you keep hearing this emphasis on healthcare being local, or I've heard hyper local sometimes. And it's nice to hear that organizations that are in the same backyard have an opportunity, there's synergies there to do business together. I think everybody's rowing in the same direction and trying to figure out how do we solve this big healthcare problem that's enormously complex. Is that where the web, very difficult, spider web?
It's kind of the spider
where
web.
It came from. The origins
I think we were in vogue before we knew we were in vogue with spider web. But the name web, started out because during that time of the .com side of things, anything web related with the name web. But it just made sense to go WebTPA because we were at that time really looking to differentiate ourselves in the market, our system, our people, and the process that we do. And I think that's another thing I just want to add is when you think of WebTPA, I think what we focused a tremendous amount of time on is our people. Sometimes we get caught up in technology and all those things, but ultimately it comes down to the people. In this business, especially when you're dealing in the complexities that we have to deal in these self-funded clients, or whether it's the outsourcing or health plans or in large employer, it ultimately comes down to the people. And so we spend a lot of time making sure our culture is excellent. We continue to invest in our culture, and even in spite of the pandemic we're in, we've tried to do as much as possible to keep that culture. We call it the WebTPA family. We really do believe it is family. That when they come into this, because it's a mission for us. It's not just a job because of the complexity we've talked about. Healthcare's not easy today. It's expensive, And you've got to have people who are passionate about knowing that it is complex. People are frustrated with it. We've got to have great people that are on that phone listening and helping people through it. Technology can only take you so far. You know, you have, we call it the AI and HI. You got artificial intelligence and human intelligence. You've got to have both.
Agreed.
A lot of companies are just saying, hey, AI, and I go, that's great. But if you don't have the HI in that, you're really going to miss something in this space, especially.
Well, it's funny being in a technology space. Like once you introduce a technology that can automate some things that human beings usually do manually, they're always your customers are always like, well, what's next?
Right.
Can you do everything for me?
Right.
And I think no matter how sophisticated our software ultimately gets, I think the RFP process itself will still inherently remain more complex than the software. Exactly. So it does require the human element, and even if you try to teach a machine to read documents or do things like that, there's still the logic and the reasoning that sometimes gets lost in that equation. Yeah. We found too that, like you said, the good people, if the problem is so complex, by nature, that means issues are going to arise that can't just be automated out. And so a human being ultimately is going to have to solve that or be accountable if something happens. Like, okay, tell me the problem, I'll go fix it, or we'll figure out how to fix it. That you just can't do. You can't flip a switch and that it gets fixed automatically. Yeah. But it's funny too. It's once you show somebody, you give them an inch, they want a mile. It's like once we show people what the software does for us, it's like, can it do everything? Yeah. You're like, well, what are you going to do then on the other side of that is always the question. But I think no matter what we do, the human beings are going to be the most important part of this equation. Yeah. So we talked about future of web, but big picture, you've a person with a lot of experience, been a part of a number of companies. What about industry future? Where is this thing going ultimately, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've been in this industry a long time, and I think we've always asked that question every year.
What's the future? Well, we're in the future
because
now.
It's a constant changing environment. Yeah. I think the future will always be, as we are experiencing today, is more changes, more need to be flexible, more need to create better ways to engage the patient into the journey of healthcare. The way I look at it today, my fear, maybe start with my fear. My fear right now is, as we look at what companies are trying to do, what everybody's trying to do is, we're putting a lot of stuff out there, whether it's, you name it, from the transparency tools to telehealth to centers of excellence, bundled arrangements, insert whatever else you want to do. So we've really created all these niches into this segment, and they're all good. The question is, how do you take all those niches and bring them back to a process that somebody who may never have accessed healthcare in the past and may never access healthcare again, but is accessing care right now for a serious situation or a minor situation, you're asking them to figure out all that stuff. And so the burden now becomes on companies like a web to how to make that a seamless and effective interaction at the moment of truth. Yeah. When that person walks in the doctor's office or the hospital and say, I now have to be an expert in everything my employer has said is everything you should do. All these tools we offer, all these engagement things. And I think we have to continue to work on that. Now at Web, we will be introducing some new things we'll announce later on how to do that. But that's one of the things we got to stay in front of, is sometimes we can outsmart ourselves in some of these things by saying, look at all these things here. And ultimately we go, yeah, but that consumer walks into the doctor's office. Yes, you had open enrollment, but they may never look at something until they have the ID card. And that's the only interaction they have. And they show up in a hospital or the doctor's office. That's when they got to, quote, how do you bring all this stuff to the table at the right time, right place, at the right price? Yeah. And I think we're getting better at that, but we still have a ways to go with that.
Well, that's an interesting way to position it. I haven't actually considered that, right? The level of sophistication that's required for somebody that has a singular event and to need to figure out how to navigate the system. Obviously, you've got companies, steerage companies and customer, client advocates, whatever you want to, healthcare coaches, whatever you want to call it. But it is in a weird situation where it's incumbent upon the individual that has absolutely no experience is also supposed to be the expert in that moment at the same time. So I can't wait to hear what you guys are doing there. I know you'll make announcements, but
one thing I want to just add to that too, though, is one of the things that we've always struggled with in the industry is the 80-20 rule. 20% of your population accounts for 80% of your cost. If you strip down that 20%, you find that 5% are accounting for half those costs. The trick is always get to the 5%, because you can spend a lot of time and effort on somebody who doesn't even move the needle at all, trying to get them engaged in healthcare, and you go, well, they had an MRI, it was $1,000, that was it. That was the only time they had interaction per se. The 5% are the ones you're trying to get to, because they're the ones driving the cost. The problem is that 5% changes year to year sometimes. So we have to figure out how to keep that 80% knowing enough about it, but really drill deeper into those that either we know are going to be train wrecks or already train wrecks, to get them engaged in the process beyond what they have. So that's
by
really
nature is difficult, because sometimes those are unpredictable by nature as well. I mean, that's what you talk about stop loss. We mentioned that a couple times. The specific stop loss, most of your premium goes to that, because most of that is unpredictable risk. The aggregate risk itself is very, very predictable. So, I'm glad you guys are trying to solve this, because that's a problem that I think everybody's been trying to solve, is the person that has a singular event that's catastrophic, that was quote unquote unpredictable in nature. How do you at least triage that to a degree to keep, either reduce the cost or, hopefully even prevent something catastrophic? We of course talked about how, last year, a lot of the preventative measures kind of went by the wayside, or the early detection, things like that, which is sad to know. And I hope there isn't necessarily a bad outcome that comes from some of that. So, wrapping up here, Dwight, this has been incredible. So thank you for your time, man. Thank you. If we're going to leave the folks with anything today, I've had a great couple of nuggets here, I think, that you've mentioned, but what would you like to leave the audience with, as a parting gift of knowledge?
Well, first, thank you, Spencer, for the opportunity to share a little bit about WebTPA. I think, first of all, there is no silver bullet. I think we've always in this industry said, well, where's the silver bullet? We always realize there's no silver bullet. It is complex work we're dealing with now. With the hospitals consolidating, with the provider groups consolidating, there's so much consolidation going on. The hope was always a consolidation will somehow bring more efficiencies. It's not. If you look at all the data relating to any consolidation of a hospital system, consolidating with another health system, prices go up and not as efficient. So all that of, hey, it's going to create efficiency and lower costs, it's not happening. Then you have venture capital now that's really jumped in and started buying up all these provider groups, whether you're dermatology groups, oncologists, anesthesiologists, they're in there big time buying up. Then you have the urgent care facilities, which are VC, huge market going into startups in the urgent cares. In my town of Coppell, I swear we have maybe 6 or 7 urgent care facilities. I go, I don't know how you sustain that. Yeah. But you have all this stuff that's all looking for an exit, right? So the golden nugget there is we've got to figure out back to, the whole thing, keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing has to be, let's step back and say, if that employer is sitting there going, I have to be a fiduciary of my benefits here. I have to figure out, I've only got so many dollars and I've got to be competitive in the market. How do we as fiduciaries make sure we're getting the best that we can offer to that employee? That employee has to have a partnership in that as well in today's environment, because the deductibles, co-insurance keep going up. There has to be some buy-in in that process. I think we're getting better at that. But the golden nugget, I think, right now is it is going to take even more work to sit down and figure this out than in the past, because the markets that I've just described are so much different than they were a couple of years ago. And so it's like putting the proverbial finger in the balloon, it's popping up somewhere else. So what that means to kind of end this is it's going to take an administrative platform or somebody like a WebTPA that has to sit down with an employer who's saying, I'm struggling with all these things you're describing, but I've got to change the way we do things. I can't just take a cookie cutter and try to make it. I've got to try to something different. And so that's where we've had to play and are playing and will continue to play because it is getting more complex. The ability to want more and more different niches in that segment and then wiring it together in a seamless fashion with the hope that that employee is going to be engaged in that process is really something we got to really work on for the future.
Well, you guys seem like well positioned, if anybody, to be able to solve that. But like you said, it's a never-ending process. There is no such thing as a final solution to this stuff. If somebody was interested in the services of WebTPA, what's the best way to either get in touch with the organization or the sales team? Who should they go to?
Yeah, the best way is just on website www.webtpa.com. And if our Chief Growth Officer, Megan Rigby, she's awesome. She's one of the best in the industry of just understanding this segment, and will be a great person, a resource to filter any opportunities available. We welcome that, and we're happy to sit down and just discuss what-if scenarios as well.
I love that. Yeah, it's kind of like if you see an advertisement for a new prescription on TV, and ask your doctor about this prescription. Always ask your advisor as well about WebTPA, and I'm sure they obviously can get you in touch. But again, I appreciate you, sir, very much. Great to see you again. Tell Blake I said hello as well.
I will.
And I look forward to doing this again soon sometime.
Hey, that'd be great. Thanks, Spencer.
Thank you, Dwight.